Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be discussing socket programming in a very brief way, and we'll be looking at the Python code for socket programming. So you might have got socket programming in your network and communication class if you're a computer science student, and might be confused about what it actually is. So in this video we'll be just looking at socket programming in a very short duration of time. I'll be giving the overview as well as you'll be able to understand the code very clearly. Okay, so first, what is socket programming and why we use it? Socket programming is basically for any two machines or any two things to connect. We have endpoints which are called sockets. So when a machine is communicating with another, like for example, we have a server and a client. The server is communicating to the client. There is the endpoint which sends the message, and there is one endpoint which receives the message. So those endpoints are basically called sockets. So there is one socket in the server and one socket in the client. So if the server wants to send a message or if the client wants to send a message to the server, the endpoints are the sockets, like the sockets send or receive the messages. Okay. So now we have a few functions that help us achieve this socket programming. So in socket programming, what we have to do is we'll have to create the socket, then we'll be sending the messages and receiving the messages, and all these things we'll be doing using socket programming. So socket programming, as we've already discussed, it is for sending or receiving or connecting two devices through the sockets, and we'll be able to, as I said, send or receive messages. So we have a few functions that help us do these particular actions that we need. So the first function is we have to write two separate programs, one for the server and one for the client. You can have them on different machines, but here we'll be having them in the same machine. We'll be using two different terminals to check out the outputs. Okay, so first let us look at the server functions. The server functions have the socket function, which is to first create the socket, then bind. I hope you guys know what a port is. Our laptop or our any device or any machine has ports, which is like the smallest unit of a location where anything can happen in a laptop or in any computer machine. So we'll need a port, like for example our different ports are allocated for different functions in our machine. So we will be using, because we are doing socket programming on our own, we'll be using a port that is not generally used for any common functions. So along with the socket, we need to bind a port, which is we need to connect a port to the socket so that the action can actually be happening, like so that the processing can actually happen. We need a port for the processing to happen. So the bind function binds the port with the socket, the port that we give with the socket. Then we have the listen function. The listen function is basically it listens to the incoming connection requests. Like the server is the server, right? Clients want to connect to the server. So when clients want to connect to the server is constantly, there's a listen function which is constantly listening and looking out for connection requests from different clients. We have the accept function. Once the server finds the connect request from some client, it accepts it if it finds it to be genuine, and then read and write data happens, and then we close the we close the socket. So similarly in the client also we have to create a socket, and as we are listening and accepting here, right? So here we have to send the connection request. So the client will be sending the connection request, and since the server, so we have a connect function here, and since the server has been listening and waiting for connection requests, when a connection request comes to the server, if it finds it to be genuine, it accepts it, and the transfer of messages, read and write of data happens, then we close both the sockets. So the overall flow is that I've done server separately, I've done client separately, but to combine both of them now, we create a socket on the server as well as on the client. We bind the sockets to the ports. Then the server is constantly listening for connection requests. It's constantly waiting for connection requests. When a connection request from a particular client comes, and if the server finds it to be genuine, it will accept the connection request and the data transfer can happen. Once the required data transfer is completed, we will close the sockets, and that will be the end of the program. Okay. So now let us look at the Python code for these functions. Basically, we can use C++ or C or any language, but in Python, all these socket function, like this socket function, bind function, are already defined internally in the socket library. So we will not need to write all the internal details. Like if you look at the C code, it is very long because all these functions also will have to be written by us, and the C codes are very, very long. But the Python we have around 10 to 15 lines of code, but C will have at least 30 to 40 lines of code for the same purpose. So that is why we are using Python here. Okay, so first we'll be importing the socket. First I'll be showing you the server's code. First we'll be importing the socket library. In that we are first calling the socket, which basically creates a socket for the server. So, and then we are printing the message so that we understand that the socket has been successfully created. We are printing the message socket successfully created. Then we have the port number. As I said, we have to give a port that is less used. So you can give 1 2 3 4 5 or 1 2 3 4 7. All these ports that are not used much, we can give those ports for the socket programming to happen. Then we bind the socket with the port that we have just given here. So the socket will be binded, and we are printing the socket will be binded to the port, and we are printing that socket binded to the particular port number. Then we are listening for 5 seconds. So the socket starts the server starts listening, that is, it keeps looking for connection requests, and we are printing socket is listening. At this particular time, we will move on to the client, and in the client we've already imported the socket. We've created a socket. We have assigned the port. Of course, the port should be same. Here we have given 1 2 3 4 7. Here also we'll have to give 1 2 3 4 7. That's done. We are connecting on localhost, because we have now in our case we are using the same machine, right? But if you have two different machines, if your server is on a different machine and your client is on a different machine, then here you'll have to give the server's IP address. But because you are using the same machine, I'm giving the localhost's IP address. Okay, I mean I'm giving the localhost's address. Okay, so now and the port number that we've assigned here, we are giving it here. Once this is done, we're sending the connection request to this particular server, and the server finds it good, and if it'll accept the connection request, and we are printing got connection from the address, from where did we get the connection. So that we'll be printing, and from the server side we are sending a message called, so got connection from this, there the connection has happened. Now the server and the client are connected. Now what we are doing is we are sending a message to the client called thank you for connecting. So this message we are encoding it and sending it to the client. The client can read it. So we have encoded it there, right? So we are decoding it here, and we are printing the message. S.receive. The receive function helps here. The send function helps us send the message. The receive function helps us receive the message. So here we are sending the thank you for connecting message. We are sending it to the client, and the client is receiving the message using the receive function, and it is printing it. So once it is printed, we close the socket. Similarly, here also we close the socket and break the loop. So even multiple can also happen. So multiple also multiple connections also can be there. So that is why we are having a loop here, while true loop, and we are breaking it here because we just want to look at the demo. So now for us to, we'll just look at the output of this code. So for us to actually run this application or run a socket program, before the client starts, before we run the client program, first the server program should be running, because only if the server is up, the client can send the request, right? So first the server should be up, and then the client can be, because only if the server is already listening to the or looking for connection request, a connection request that is sent by the client will be accepted or will be noticed. So that is why we are supposed to run the server function, server first. We have to up the server first, and then only we can run the client code. So I'm just running the socket binded successfully, that is, the socket is created successfully create it first, successfully created, then bind it to this port number 12347, and the socket is listening, that is, it is looking for connection requests. Now I'll open another terminal and I'll run the client function. Client function says thank you for connecting. So it means that the message is sent by the server, and the message is thank you for connecting, and that message has been accepted or received by the client. So the connection has been made, the message has been received by the client, and the client is printing it on the terminal. We can, if you want to try it out, you can just, it's just fun exploring all this. So you can also s dot send, we are thanking there, so I'm just giving your welcome. So for example, I'm sending your welcome, and here we have print. Of course we'll have to encode it also. Okay, we are encoding it, and then let's copy this same thing here. Okay, this particular connection, and we are sending a we are receiving a message from this particular connection C, and we want to print it. We're decoding it and then printing it. Okay, so I'll just run this. Let's run the server first, and then let's run the client. So thank you for connecting. Okay, so I think the problem here is we're receiving it first. Let us send it first. Probably it should work then, and we'll have to put this receive also here. Okay, so let's run the server first, and we'll run the client. As you can see, we've got thank you for connecting from the server, and we've got your welcome on the server. So because we are closing it as soon as we are sending the message, so that is the reason it is not being sent. So first we've done the send function, so the server received it and the server printed it. Once it's printed, like it prints it printed your welcome on the server, then we are sending thank you for connecting to the client, and that is what the client is printing. So this is how socket programming works, and this is the Python code that we've seen. So try exploring a little more on this, and it's just fun. So you'll have fun exploring different options, different functions that are there in socket programming. Okay, so this was just the basic overview of how socket programming works. So if you like this video, please do like, share and subscribe, and thank you for watching.